Hi guys, hey, I have a line art and color wash piece that we're going to be working on today. It's going to be of a chicken, another bird, but it's fun. This is kind of a standard assignment I like to give my students up at the university when they're working and getting started with watercolor in either my watercolor class or my drawing class. It's something that I think yields a lot of good results from skills that they're just developing, and it's a nice easy way and a nice easing into watercolor technique that yields a lot of good results when students are working with it and building skills with their watercolor. So we definitely are relying upon the line art to be the structure and the foundation of everything that happens then with the watercolor when we introduce it. So it's definitely heavy on the drawing part, and this is a very flexible technique. You can modify how much line work you do versus color, or which is dominant, the line art, or do you want to make the color. So it's just a matter of intensity of one or the other, and you can definitely do, and this one's going to be a fairly highly rendered version of line art of the chicken, and then the color is going to be in support of the line art. So, but it can happen either way. So it's a lot of fun. It's very user friendly, and you should get some really good results with it when you try it out and work with it. It takes some practice, as with everything. Just have to kind of dive in and work on it and mess up, do it again, and pretty soon you'll develop a nice hand with your ink drawing. And this is kind of the follow-up to the eagle that I was going to produce as a color line art wash piece that I messed up, where I didn't use indelible ink and I used a ink that reactivated when I tried to add the water on. So this time I'm going to be working on a Canson paper. Again, that student grade paper. It's very smooth, and again, it dries fast, and it has a smooth surface, and it takes ink really well. So this is a great paper for this technique and a way of painting and describing things. So as you can see, I'm working the sketch together. It's going to be fairly tight. I don't follow it perfectly as I draw it in pencil. I use the pencil as just kind of a guideline. And then I get started working with the ink. Like I stated on my bald eagle drawing, I like starting off with the eye. If I can get the eye looking right, everything seems to go pretty well after that. So I work in a lot of the contrast. These are all structural description marks. I'm filling in shapes with a lot of ink and getting the right contrast and the right line thickness. And as soon as I get the eye done, I'll start moving into more textural type marks to indicate feathers and the feathery shapes that are created. And right there, I'm starting and moving into that kind of a textural mark, a feathery feel to it. It's a broken edge. I don't do a continuous outline. And I'm doing some simple little line as value on the shadow on that eye. And now some directional line on the roundness of that eyelid. So yeah, textural marks, descriptive marks, structural marks, and contour marks. And I'll just bounce around and then keep working, just like on the bald eagle. This is going to be the foundation of all the work that we'll do with the color. And this is a fun technique. It's a pretty bulletproof technique for beginners, especially if you're also working to develop line skills, drawing skills. I had a comment from a viewer stating that they're looking forward to be able to work with line art and color washes, and it is a fun technique. It's quick, it's fast, it's fairly reliable too for beginners as well. So really you have to kind of develop a hand and a technique that you like drawing with ink. and then combine that with your skills and understanding of everything that you know about watercolor. I'm doing this on a Canson paper. It's that student grade paper. It's got a fairly smooth texture and it takes ink really well. And I'm drawing with a Sharpie marker. Sharpie markers have a consistent tip, so if you want a thick line or a thin line, you have to kind of repeat the stroke to get it to look thicker. So it's only at a certain width and thickness, and you can see right there I made the lower portion of the chicken's beak a little wider than what I originally drew it, and those are structural marks. Working some textural marks there now, description marks, the underneath edge of that beak, the overhang, it's almost a shadow line. Textural marks forming a descriptive edge. Broken line, again, I do not do continuous outlines, especially with a realistic line illustration. Some textural marks there, little contrast marks, thickening up the edges, the dark areas in that lower beak, describing the nostril area in and around that little lip area. And again, I work around the whole piece. I don't work in one specific area until it's finished. Now that was line as value, so that was to create a sense of tone. So that value recedes into the distance. It's kind of a shadow area, so need a little tone. Back to descriptive marks, trying to describe the outer edge of that crown on the beak. It had a very irregular organic shape to it, and there are symbolic marks as well in there. I think I'll throw in some symbols. I'm describing a reflection right there. Yeah. Bouncing around. Description, textures, value. That's a contour. That's a descriptive contour value mark. So you can see, you can definitely start combining them all into, doing a specific thing. There are like 3 different types and descriptions of marks right there, doing a number of things. Adding more value in. There's some line as value right there in that shadow area. Right there as well. Back to feathery descriptive marks. Symbolic textures. Line as value. Line as value. Dropping in shadows. Now when you're working this technique with watercolor, you do have to kind of balance out and think about how much work do you want the line art to do versus how much work do you want the water to do, the color work to happen. And you can vary the intensities of either. You can have a lot of detail on the line art and just have the color be a very suggested support role, or vice versa. You can make the color work the more dominant thing and the line art just there to punch up the overall contrast. So it's just a matter of what you like working with, what you discover is the thing you like to do. So play around with it, try both directions. You can start with line art first. You can then also start with the color work first. Drop in some really random colors, let it all dry, and then do your drawing on top of it. That works just as well as this version. And I'll try to do a version of that you can see how that works as well. not in this piece, but on another one. I'll do another tutorial, line art and color. So again, back to descriptive, broken edges, trying to get a feathery feel through just line. And this takes practice. You have to work with this and develop that hand. And again, practice this a lot, because when you're unsure, if you're not sure what you're doing, you are still figuring things out, all of that uncertainty comes through the mark. So the more you practice, the more confident you get, the more loose and descriptive and believable your marks become. So again, adding in a little more value. Line is value. That's hatching. I don't do a lot of cross hatching. It's typically just hatching or developing some sort of a contrasting or combination stroke of line as value versus and or incorporating the line descriptive qualities of line. So as soon as I get all of my ink work done, and we're getting close, we'll start dropping in color. Now a lot of this line art, line as value that I'm doing, that could all be done, that could have been eliminated. I didn't have to draw it. That could all be done with color. But I was definitely going after a fairly highly rendered line illustration of this chicken, and then we'll just throw in, oh, those are symbolic marks right there. These are textural marks. I'm coming back in, popping in a little more contrast here and there. So how you make your mark is going to affect how it reads. Little structural mark there. Cross contour. Structural marks just to indicate the flow of the feathers. Not really worrying about the feathers, but definitely getting the direction that those feathers flow. It reminds me, it's one of my go-to sayings for students that they might be drawing something and they're not sure what to do next, and one of my favorite sayings is, well, then put a chicken in it, right? Put a rooster in it. That'll be something interesting for people. And if it's not a chicken or a rooster, I'll tell them put a monkey in it. And they just they just don't know where I'm coming from there. It actually goes back to an exhibition we had of some student work in the hallway of the art department, and somebody had drawn, one of the students had drawn the greatest portrait of a monkey, and he looked so angry. So that led to that saying kind of being born. Put a monkey in it, put a chicken in it. Chicken's the same thing, you can't go wrong. If you need something in it, put a chicken in it. All right, so now I'm erasing all the pencil marks. And now we're going to come in and add that wash layer of color. And that wash, the color work, is in support of all the work we did with the ink work, the ink wash. Just dropping it in. And this is the standard issue. Remember, this is the scary part when you're first dropping water onto your white paper. It's going to seem very saturated. It's going to be shockingly colorful, right? But don't worry, it dries lighter than expected. So you can drop in, it's a fairly thin mixture, it's a tea mixture, and I'm just blocking in rough colors, the local colors. So that chicken had that red beak, throwing a little bit of it. I'm breaking. I didn't want it to be too coloring book, right? That's the biggest pitfall of this technique, is that you think you have to stay in the lines, right? You've been trained for years to stay within the lines when you're coloring, and don't worry about it. Ignore it. Break outside. Let that color be fluid. Drop in a little bit of that orange. Again, pulling it out even into the background. Throwing that orange in and around. That color is fluid. It is transient. It goes everywhere. So just dropping it in, creating some visual interest with those washes. This is a harmonious palette so far. So the red and oranges are all very harmonious. And now I'm dropping in a little color contrast with some phthalo blue, cooling down those white feathers. All right. And again, this is just essentially color blocking. Throw a little bit of green out there in the background. And look at it transitioning in on top of the feathers there. It's nice wet on wet. All right, testing it. All right, now I'm adding a little of the violet into the shadows on the various forms on the bird. Just get a little more of that contrast. Still pretty wet, but with this Canson paper, it dries quickly. All right, a little more of that bluish purple, violet. Creates a little more structure, a little more depth. Feathering it out. And like I said, this technique really is a lovely introduction to doing a piece with the control that you might have if you're good with your drawing, the control you have with pen and ink. And then if you're not quite up to speed or that confident with your watercolor work, this is a nice way to meld the two things, the control of pen and ink and the color flexibility and the fluidity of watercolor. Now I'm adding in more saturation, getting that red to be redder, so I'm mixing up the colors a little thicker so it has a little more punch and pop. Intensifying that orange on the beak. The background's drying now. There's still a wet spot down there. I'm going to get my finger in it, I think, if I remember correctly. All right. We'll just keep going, saturating, glazing in more color, finding the structure, finding the detail. Reactivating some spots that needed. Okay, it's kind of bouncing around now. I'm adding some splatters in there. I like doing splatters. It's just a nice textural, visual interest that I like adding in. And we're getting ready to move into the point where I'm going to start working with some opaque white. I'm going to rework areas and pull out highlights. A little more feather structure. Dropping it in just where I want some pop to happen. So as in all of my tutorials, it's the back end of the process where you're bouncing around, adding all those little touches of detail, highlight, the sparkle, the bling to the watercolor. So definitely try this technique. It is a very user-friendly approach to making and using watercolor and combining it with something that you might feel a little more comfortable with when you're drawing. I want to come in and finish up the highlights, and I got a bit more saturation I think I'm want to put up on the top of his head where the comb is. As soon as I get the last little highlights done, I need just a little more contrast. So if you have enjoyed this video, think you've got some good information out of it, give it a try, see how it goes. If it doesn't go well, try it again. It always helps. There's that contrast. A little more saturated, thicker paint there. Pop it around. Give this approach a try. Try it a couple of ways. Do the line art first, then try the color first, and then let it dry and draw the ink on top of it. And I think you'll be surprised at how well it will come together. It's going to give you a great boost of confidence. You'll look like a freaking genius when you do it and show it off to people. And here is the final piece all completed. If you got any good information out of this tutorial, give me a like and a subscribe. I appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next demo.